talk non so thank you for just joining to talk about change, driving and sustaining change in organizations. As Anthony said, I do bleed blue and gold because I love North Park and I love Viking athletics and follow the teams very carefully, and I really enjoy my role as professor in the Graduate School of Nursing. And then after my second degree from North Park, I did go on and get a doctorate in nursing practice at Loyola University, and that was with a systems leadership and a thrust in population health. Well, let's get started. I developed a few learning objectives. We just want to look at change and different approaches to how to manage change and to sort of learn our role, and particularly the role of the leader. And I'm going to make an assumption that we are all leaders, even if we may not have the title, that we are leaders in our work. And I want us to understand how org culture can really help drive positive change and sustain positive change. We're going to look at just some concepts and then a couple of theories and models, but I promise to keep it brief. This is sort of a high level with some, I think, hopefully really good takeaways for you in your work. And so, um, yeah, so, I'll start with a joke. Plastic surgery used to be a taboo subject and nobody would talk about it. It was really always kept private, but times have changed. You bring up Botox and nobody lifts an eyebrow. All right, Bakken, don't quit your day job. Um, so I love Bob Dylan and the Bob Dylan movie, and Bob Dylan said the times they are a changing. I went to a healthcare conference for health executives, and a guy named Jeffrey Bauer, a healthcare futurist, was the keynote, and he said, "No, it's not just the times that are changing; the changes are changing." And then change is inevitable, change is constant from British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. And then the problem statement that we have, and that is that change is difficult, right? And I'll agree with Benjamin Disraeli that change is inevitable unless it's from a vending machine. And you guys know that vending machine outside the gym, you may not get change from that. And then there's this assertion, right? How true, am I right? The only person who likes change is a baby in a wet diaper. Well, one of the drivers of change is research. And one of the issues with research and innovation is that people don't like change. And publications are full of research findings. Peer-reviewed journals are there, and those research findings, they're sitting there and they're collecting dust and mold. Um, One of those is my research that did get published in a peer-reviewed journal, and there it sits. Why? Because change is difficult. And so we're led to this chasm between what we know and what we do. And this is where you come in. So good managers, good leaders can fill this gap with leadership strategy and to do something that I'll describe as the unleashing intrinsic motivation for change. So extrinsic motivation for change will work for a while. And you might have encountered this in your work. Do this or you'll be fired. Get this report on my desk by 5 or you'll be written up. And that's extrinsically motivating. And it works, but there is a better way. And it's called unleashing intrinsic motivation. And this is the idea that's linked to this positive org culture. So extrinsic motivation works for a while, but it can lead to dissatisfaction and even something that we call quiet quitting, where people they just up and leave. And so let's get some definitions. So I think you know what change is. It's very simple. It's the process of making something different from what it was before. It typically involves altering, modifying, transforming, replacing something with something else, something new, something different. We might say that a transitional change is just an incremental adjustment. Transitional change might be something like this that happened at one of my employers. Um, from now on, all employees must enter the building through the main entrance. The south entrance is going to close due to security reasons. And that was a very unpopular decision. And it meant people changing behavior. Transitional change is minor. And this one from just recently from uh, Starbucks. From now on, all baristas must wear solid black tops and khaki, black or denim slacks so that the green apron stands out. So that's transitional change, and they're and sometimes that's difficult for us. Transformational change is bigger, right? That's a radical shift. That's caterpillars becoming butterflies. I mean, that might be the U.S. federal government implementing tariffs, or organizations using AI for processes that were formerly human endeavors, or an organization that decides we're no longer going to accept cash. These are big radical shifts. And so change has many sides, many dimensions. It's a dynamic that can't be avoided in society. We cannot control it, but we can influence it. And we can lead ourselves and our teams through the circumstances, through the consequences. And so change occurs from external factors. And I come from healthcare, and so we have regulatory bodies in our healthcare ministries, hospitals and skilled nursing facilities. We have Joint Commission that is our accrediting body, and their standards are constantly changing because science and evidence changes, and they'll say from now on you have to do it this way. And this is really difficult for us. So that's an example of external change. And it can be a change in politics or legislation or social factors. Now, change can be internal. I mean, new leaders come and go. You get a new vice president, a new CEO, organizations merge, and a whole leadership team comes in and takes over. And so we might say that there's radical change, which is revolutionary, and like the AI influences in business, or the change might be incremental, and we might call that evolutionary. And so we have some serious headwinds out there. And these headwinds overlay change onto us as individuals, as professionals. And so this list is certainly only a partial list, but it could be, as I mentioned, regulatory, reimbursement, science and evidence. Our medical conditions, our own bodies are constantly changing. Political parties change, policy change, consumer values. And so we have a lot of sources of change. And let's add now AI to the mix. So change and innovation are everywhere in the post-digital universe that we're in. It's happening so fast that we don't fully comprehend how the changes will affect us, and we're hard pressed to cope and really fully understand the implications. As soon as we have time to reflect, then another change is on us. And so this list on this slide are from scholars, healthcare scholars Johnson and Rosso, and they've sort of developed sort of six domains: technology, globalization, cost containment, speed of market change, knowledge capital, and just the increasing rate and magnitude of change. And so change is disruptive. It can bring uncertainty and anxiety. And so leaders must be able to both lead and manage and drive positive change. Negative change can just happen, but positive change has to be intentionally driven. And so much of what goes on in business and healthcare involves change. I want you to think of some examples of change in your organization. And I'll give you an example here in Chicago. Lurie Children's Hospital had a severe cyber security event in January of 2024 that lasted an entire month, forced them to shut down all their phones, shut down their electronic medical record. They had to shut down the patient portal. They couldn't schedule appointments or surgeries and procedures. And when the electronic medical record went down, they had to transition to paper. And the role of the leader and the manager was to carefully plan and communicate and execute strategies and tactics for themselves and for their teams. And so when things like that happen, we must embrace. learn to adapt. We can't drag our feet and refuse to change or put our heads in the sand. And so think about your work environment and what sort of changes are happening. And so people typically go through predictable emotional responses. It includes maybe denial, apprehension, and then we hope acceptance. But you can count on resistance. Why? It really comes down to fear. Fear that their own human needs will not be met. Fear of stress, fear of extra work, fear of possible loss of something of value. And these fears are real. And so this graphic, if you're a leader or manager, this might be what it feels like with in your workplace and with your team. And so Peter Olden is another healthcare strategist and executive that talks about inertia, defined as that objects at rest tend to stay at rest, and objects in motion continue in motion. So let's try to get something at rest to move. That's difficult. So inertia is an enemy of positive change. And Olden would say that people resist change because they've been accustomed to inertia. And so this graphic might help you sort of understand that when you come into an organization and you want to strategize, the culture is an old saying that culture eats strategy for lunch. Actually, culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's difficult to implement new strategies or make positive changes when the culture has been reinforced. And so we'll talk about how to change that problem of inertia in a minute. And so, one of the first things you want to assess is your own response. The response to change, your own response to change becomes sort of your first step, and recognize that maybe the barrier might be you and or your unique relationship with stakeholders. And so employees at all levels may resist change, and it might look like this graphic, that there's just a lot of pushback. Um, and not everyone will do this, but I think everyone knows the people in your organization. I'll just call them stoppers. Do you know what stoppers are? Almost every department has a stopper, like a Debbie or Doug Downer, right? We're doomed. We're never going to make it. Not everyone will do this. Some team members will show trust and adaptation, and those you want to strategically team up with, right? To help um, bring the others along. If you've got people that are receptive, and you may even want to put Debbie or Doug Downer on the committee, right? So that's a inclusive decision making. Bottom line is that managers, leaders should expect resistance and be ready with a plan to mitigate that. And so whether you're dealing with transitional change or transformational change, you still definitely want to involve your stakeholders, right? Help people find new meaning in their work. You need clear, concise, and frequent communications. Communicate the rationale. Why are we changing? And then target experimentation. And so I want to spend a little bit of time on a simple model that we use in healthcare, and it's called PDSA. It's really simple. It's called Plan, Do, Study, Act. It's called the Rapid Cycle Performance Improvement Model. And so this is a really helpful way to make positive changes in organization. And I'll give you an example. I worked at Holy Family Medical Center in Des Plaines, Illinois for 11 years, and this was a long-term hospital. These patients that we had were very sick. Most of them were on ventilators, a machine that's breathing for you. And they were in a long, prolonged time of recovery. And patients stayed in the hospital a month. They're on these machines that are breathing for them. And so they're very sick. But the research told us, and our pulmonary physicians, the pulmonologists especially, said, we need to get every one of our ventilator patients out of the bed and into the chair once a day. We knew that the research was very clear that if patients get out of the bed and sit in the chair, their skin improves, their lungs expand, their morale improves. You would not believe the revolt that we had on our hands from the staff. They did not want to do this. And so I was part of the leadership team that said, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to execute this change? We used PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act, to as a method and a framework to help us do this. And so we had to collaborate. We had to get the nursing assistants. We had to get respiratory. We had to get the chair on the side of the room where the ventilator was, so the tubing would fit. We had to arrange and properly place all of the IV pumps, and the urinary catheters had to be properly positioned. We had to get help from respiratory and the PT and the PT aides and the nurses all working together. And I have some more slides on PDSA coming up, and so I want you to keep that fresh in your mind. So we developed this plan, and we said, okay, we're going to do this on 3 North. We had an excellent manager on 3 North. She was part of our team, and she was all bought in on this. So we weren't chasing buy-in with her. And we said, all right, we're going to start on 3 North. And we created something called a Pareto board, which is a way to document each day what which patients got up and out of bed, and if they didn't, why. And so we did this on 3 North, and then finally the change began to take hold, and then we were able to move it to 3 South, and then to 4 North, and then to 4 South, and then to the ICU. And so we did this slowly over time using this PDSA model. All right, I'll get back to that in a few minutes. I wanted to come to this German American sociologist and look at the year that he created this, 1947. And Lewin came up with this model. It is so simple, it is so easy, and yet I think it's brilliant. And so here it is. When it comes to change, Lewin said there's 3 steps: unfreeze the old behaviors, he called that thawing, create improved behaviors while thawed, and then refreeze these new and improved behaviors. And so for Lewin, the process of change entailed creating a perception that change is needed, moving toward the new, and moving toward this desired level of behavior, and then finally solidifying that as the new norm. All right, and so I have another slide on Lewin. He just argued that that these group norms and group structure strongly influence how individuals respond. So leadership, optimism, support, and culture were strong influences in this process of unfreeze, change, and then refreeze. Let's move on to Everett Rogers. This is a social scientist. Rogers did some really brilliant research on how people respond to adoption of something new. And he put all of us into 5 main types of people when it comes to adopting innovation. And Simon Sinek has a very popular TED Talk where he beautifully explains Rogers' theory of diffusion of innovation. And so it's easy to find on a Google search. But Rogers said there are 5 main types of people. When innovation knocks on the door, the first are innovators. These are the people first to try anything new. They're really open to risk. And then the second group are called early adopters. These are people that are really interested. They want to try new technologies and they want to see what their utility is in society. And then there's the early majority. These are people that they may not be the first to try it, but they're gonna wait maybe some of the bugs to work out, and then yeah, I'm gonna do this. And then there's the late majority. These are people that are a little slow to adopting innovation as a part of their daily life. And then Roger's term, laggards. These are people who lag the general population. They're generally risk averse and set in their way of doing things. And so Rogers said basically that when it comes to diffusion of innovation, people's responses follow a normal bell curve distribution with standard deviations. And so when you think about a new technology, a new platform like AI, at North Park, it was a learning management platform called Canvas that we had to adapt to, and it could be, any other thing, online banking. There's so many examples that there's innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. And I think it's really helpful to know that this is how people. So here's your strategy. You want to get to that early majority using the innovators and early adopters and try to sway the late majority and the laggards. And so why look at models and frameworks and theories from the 40s and 60s? Well, change is difficult. It's because these scholars did some really important research. And we are like the baby in the wet diaper. We need change. And if we're stationary, we fall behind. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, yeah, as I said, positive change just doesn't happen. It has to be driven with intentional, careful planning. And I think Lewin and Rogers can help us address these dynamics and the headwinds of change. All right, so when it comes to our work and even our own personal lives, we must always be continuously improving. And that means this openness and willingness to change. So this brings us to a guy named Deming. W. Edwards Deming was a statistician, a management theorist, and his work, he's best known for this idea of CQI, continuous quality improvement. And what he did was, after World War II, Deming's ideas were actually not accepted in the United States. He brought them to the big three manufacturers, Ford, Chevy, and Chrysler, and they were not interested. And so he actually went to Japan. And I don't know if you remember, but made in Japan used to mean kind of poor quality prior to the war. But he helped turn Japan into a symbol of excellence in electronic components and certainly cars. And one of the reasons because they really fully accepted. He taught managers at Toyota and Sony the concepts of CQI. And then finally, in the 1980s, when Japanese cars were outperforming US cars, the United States began to adopt TQM, Total Quality Management, or CQI, and change is at the heart of it, meaning we cannot accept our current performance. We strive to continuously improve. And through cooperation and problem solving. And there's a saying in healthcare that I've been sharing with my students for years, and I believe it applies to all of us. And it's this: we all have two jobs. Did you know that? You have two jobs. Do the work and improve the work. And so I want you to think about that. Everyone has two jobs. You do your work and improve your work. And I want you to take a guess at who's the best person who can improve your work. And I'll give you a hint. It's not your manager. It's not the vice president. It's you, right? And so that's some thoughts about CQI. And so here's a graphic on the PDSA model that I referenced before. I just want you to know that it doesn't take years to make changes in your organization. With this PDSA, you can plan an incremental change, test it in a short period of time, even say for a month in one department, and change the way we do one process and see if it can improve. You assign some metrics and measure performance in a small way and see if it works. And if not, tweak it, revise it, and try it again. I'll take you back to the ventilator patients at Holy Family Medical Center and the staff. You know what the staff found? You know what the CNA said? We love this getting patients into the chair. It's so much easier to change the linens in the beds when the patient is in the chair. And you know what the physical therapist said? We can do lower extremity exercises on the patient so much better when the patient's out of the bed. There's a crazy paradigm in healthcare. When people are sick, they think they're supposed to just lay in the bed. And that's exactly what you shouldn't do, right? We want to get people up and moving. Um, and 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 so there were many benefits that came from directly from the staff by making this change. And they once they saw how beneficial it was. Oh, and the patients and the families. The family said, his color looks better. I saw him smile for the first time. So this was a really positive change. It just took a really a, a creative effort to get staff on board, and we used the PDSA. Well, the PDSA just first step is plan the change, create a team, oversee your team and determine who, what, how, why we are changing, lay out the current process, map it out, and then map out what you believe to be an improvement and create a metric. You want a metric to answer the question, how will we know if we've improved? And so choosing that metric is extremely important. In healthcare, we have a metric called door to balloon. I don't know if you ever heard of this, door to balloon. And so it starts with a person walking into the emergency department with chest pain. Oh. And we already know from research that the best place for that person to go, if they truly have cardiac related chest pain, we call angina, that person needs to go to the cath lab as quickly as possible because we're going to do this procedure called angioplasty. We're going to thread a balloon up into that clogged artery, usually the coronary artery, and that balloon inflates and deflates multiple times to open up that clogged artery and resolve the chest pain without open heart surgery. So we measure this thing called door to balloon. Time is life-saving. Time is heart muscle. And so we have to do this fast. But here's the problem. The ED calls to the cath lab, says, hey, we have a patient needs a balloon. We're sending them over. And the cath lab says, we're full. No beds. Now what? That's a big problem. And so we problem solve and we have this metric called door to balloon, and we're constantly trying to improve our flows. And so when you're looking for a metric, try to find a metric that just streams the most value to the customer. All right, so then D is do the change, initiate it slowly, determine a pilot project or place for that change, and track your metric. S is study the change, examine your metrics. Is it working? Review progress towards the goal in small increments, determine if you're on course. And I referenced a Pareto chart. Again, easy to look up. A Pareto chart is a specialized bar graph that helps capture and prioritize data in process improvement. So we had a Pareto chart, we had a bulletin board, and we had huddles every day around that bulletin board to see where we're at. The last step is act, implement your changes and spread them across the organization and determine the next step in the PDSA cycle. And again, here's a graphic. What will happen if we try something new? Let's try it. Did it work? And what's next? That's the PDSA. So let's now move to a contemporary American healthcare consultant. This is a guy named Quint Studer, and I've read his a couple of his books and I heard him speak. And he's actually from Chicago, from LaGrange, Illinois. And he had this idea that organizational culture has a lot to do with performance. And he likened org culture to a flywheel. So we talked about inertia, right? So you know what a flywheel is, right? It's about inertia and motion. So a flywheel is a mechanical device that uses the principles of angular momentum, and it takes some energy to get it spinning, but once it's spinning, it keeps on spinning by itself. And Studer talked about that when you help people find purpose and intrinsic motivation in their work, and when you live your life and you do your work by principles and passion and pillar results, that the flywheel stores up energy, keeps on moving, and drives the organization forward towards those pillar results. And so Studer challenged organizations to go from good to great. That's one of his books, Good to Great. So in your organization, are you good or are you great? And how do you get up off the good plateau to great? And so he um, talked a lot about positive org culture functions as that flywheel. All right, and then Studer suggested that the next step is to hardwire. Once excellence is achieved, you want to hardwire it to make that change sustainable. And if you don't, um, employees will revert back to doing the the old way of doing things. And so Studer said you need about 3 weeks of continuous repetition with management out there in front, talking about the change. Otherwise, it's difficult, and people will go back. So hardwiring change is really important. And so Johnson and Rosso came up with some attributes of leaders for change and sustainability. And here's what they said: self-perceived change agent, they have the agency to change; a prudent risk taker, take risks, but do it thoughtfully, do it carefully; sensitive to the needs of others, you have to be a good listener; one who's able to articulate core values in very meaningful ways; someone who's flexible, open to learning; someone with cognitive skills consistent with analytic problem solving; an intuitive thinker with vision. And so, what if, and I know this sounds kooky, we communicated with the employees, of course. Communication is must be clear and effective prior to, during, and after any proposed change. All right, well, let's land the plane. What did we learn? Well, change is difficult. The only thing constant is change, and change freaks people out, and employees will resist. The problem might be you. Therefore, change needs to be a thoughtful approach with the strategy, and models are very helpful. And models from people like Lewin and Rogers and Deming and Studer we looked at. Stakeholder involvement is critical. PDSA is a simple way to help for changes to take hold softly and slowly in an evidence-based way. Then hardwiring the change is that sustainability part, and the flywheel is a helpful image of how to make changes sustainable. But one final truth, and that is that about that God doesn't change. Scripture says that He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of God remains faithful and constant. And so this Psalm 102, 25 and 26, in the beginning you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. They will wear out like a garment, like clothing. They will be changed and then discarded, but you remain the same, God. All right, so that's our final prayer. I will stop and see if anyone has any questions. I have references here. And so, Anthony and Jasana, are you there? You want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone has any questions, feel free to come off mute and ask those. If you prefer, you can drop them in the chat. We'll make sure that Dr. Bakken can see those. But yeah, feel free to come off mute, ask any questions you have.
So what do you do if you are starting to secretly suspect that you're one of the laggards?
Well, it's helpful to have that perception, and you start with your realization. And yeah, and I think you want to ask the early adopters questions, you know. And I will say that I am not in that first section. I'm a wait and see. I know there's a lot of shiny bright bulbs out there. So I'm probably in that early majority or maybe an early adopter, but I'm not the first to try new things. So I agree. I look at, yeah, anyway, sorry, do you have any other questions, comments, thoughts? I'm open to suggestions. This lecture began in a course that I taught for health science students called HSE 3900, Health Organizations, Principles and Practice. But I found this information, the whole, change model thing to be so helpful in my own personal life and professional life. And then I noted that it's not just for healthcare people, right? Even though that's my experience, I think it's yeah, Barb.
So that being said, Keith, have you used any of these theories? By the way, thank you very much. This was phenomenal. I feel like I'm getting credit for doing continuing education for my vocational growth tool with Serve Globally. So you're helping me tick that box off today. No, but just all joking aside, have you used any of this in like the church setting? Because I'm just remembering a couple years back during COVID, and when they tried to like dump a huge denominational shift on us that really tanked, and we in Serve Globally, so the missionaries around the world, we really like rebelled, because there wasn't a really good, what was the like unfreezing the old behavior. There wasn't, I really liked that model. There was just when something was just dumped on us without including us in the process, that is really painful, and you don't get anywhere with that. So I'm just wondering, because I know you also have been involved a lot in church, leadership, if you've used any of these or have seen benefits of using any of this in the church setting.
It's a great observation. During COVID, I was in grad school. I was working on my doctorate. So I was not in church leadership during that time, but it was very difficult. I know Joel and John are on from Edgewood Covenant. I don't know if you guys want to talk about change models in church. I think it applies. I really do. I think a lot of this applies even today, post-pandemic, as to how do we cope with, how do we move forward in new ways. Our church is going down that journey right now. But my personal experiences with these models have been PDSA, and I've done it a lot in various expressions. So that's why I probably spent the most time on that model, because I've done it many
No, and it
times.
it really helped to have that personal example of how you use it in the workplace.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then when you said that, you got to have management out there for like 3 weeks, you know, just cheerleading it on, so to speak. But then how everybody saw the benefits of it. And it's not rocket science, people, hello, but in some ways it is rocket science.
It was rocket science. And it's like getting a patient out of bed in the chair just seems so simple, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, very good. I want to give a quick plug for a future Compass talk. Can I do that now, Jasana? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
in October 1st, um, I'm gonna come back and do a Compass talk on the blue zones. I read this book, The Blue Zones. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but it was so powerful to me. And it's basically a research question. And the research question was this. Does anyone know anyone that's lived to be 100? So my wife's grandmother lived to be 104. And maybe everyone knows, but the researcher in this case asked the question, um, where in the world are just not one-off people living to 100, but are there clusters of consistently where people live to be 100? And if so, why? What is it? What about their lifestyle has led to these productive long lives? And it turns out there are 5 places in the world where people consistently live to be 100, and one of them is in the United States. And so they looked at nutrition, movement, and exercise. They looked at community, and they looked at the what emerged from the research was the sense of that there's sovereignty, that there's a sovereign God, and there's purpose for me in my life. So all these themes came out of the Blue Zone research, and so we're going to walk through that. And there's a lot of nutrition in there and lifestyle. Yeah, that I think is really meaningful, has been to me. And so that'll be in October. So I hope you can come back and join us for that.
And we did just put a link in the chat. So if you want to click on that, you can go ahead and register right now. Get that on your calendars.